Hi, today is the feast of the Holy Family, and we continue in our octave of Christmas or Christmas octave reflections. So, somehow we are deepening these days on the importance of being a Christian witness or developing this identity of being a Christian witness or witness of Christ, as Christians, and especially after Christmas, the baby or the child Jesus has been born in our hearts, and how we can take care of this child and help him to grow in us, that we can take on more and more the identity of being Christ towards others. So in this sense of witnessing to Jesus, who shapes our hearts, shapes our minds, shapes our lives day by day, gradually and progressively. Things are not going to happen overnight, but it's an investment in our faith to help Jesus to grow in us. So this day of the Holy Family, we're going to meditate on two particular things that we can draw from this feast. From Joseph, the figure of Joseph, and the figure of Mary, in taking care of the baby Jesus. So Joseph, if you like, we can say is a model of protection, the fatherly figure who protects his family, and Mary as the figure of nourishment, the mother who nourishes the baby from herself, from her own body. So protection and nourishment. Actually, the deeper identity of the Holy Family is not just a model of the human family, which it is, but it's much deeper. The model of the Holy Family is actually a model of what it means to be church, to be a Christian community. So we can also draw out that the two big purposes or main purposes of a Christian community or the church itself is to protect the child Jesus and to nourish him and make him grow. So these two very important roles that we see as a church. Now the readings of today somehow point towards what it means to be a Christian family. Now the Christian family is what we call the domestic church, so it's the most basic unit of what it means to be a Christian community and to be church. So many of us know this already, that the Christian family is church also, and it's the first place where children experience what it means to be church. And not just children, teenagers, growing young adults. As parents also, we keep growing. Even as parents, we are still children of the grandparents, and etc. So it's a constant school of what it means to be Christian community. It's a constant learning process, and once we reach a point where we say, oh, I've learned everything already, then that stagnates and sometimes doesn't, blocks the process of this progression or growth in the family. But anyway, the readings, if you'd like to take them, they are Sirach chapter 3 verses 2 to 6, and then jumps to 12 to 14. Say again, Sirach 3, 2 to 6 and 12 to 14. It's a beautiful image about what it means to love one's parents, moving from obedience towards honoring. As we say, as children, we are taught to obey our parents as a sign of fearing God. But as we grow older, that obedience transforms itself into honoring, into respecting, because as adults, it's not right just to obey our parents, but that part about honoring. If you remember the fourth commandment, honor thy father and your mother. That commandment is forever, whether we are children, whether we are adults, whatever stage of life we are at, we are called and asked to honor our father and our mother, our parents, or anyone we depend on. So it's a very beautiful reflection on our duties as Christians towards our parents. The psalm is taken from Psalm 128, verses 1 to 5. Psalm 128, 1 to 5, where the family becomes a blessing for those who follow these commandments of God. Those who fear the Lord, it says, blessed are those who fear the Lord and walk in his ways, because their family life will be blessed. So there's much to deepen here. whether we have an easy family life or the normal challenges of any family life. Some of us may experience also that God perhaps seems not to bless those who are honoring and fearing the Lord. And there's much richness in this psalm to help us to deepen and understand why we have challenges as well, in our family life. But invites us, whatever it is, to continue fearing the Lord and trusting in His commands. The second reading is also a beautiful reading about family life in the Lord. So what is family life as Christians? So there are many ways of being family and perhaps valid models as well. But the second reading from Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 to 21. Colossians 3, 12 to 21. Wow, it's just so much richness there to meditate and reflect on about how to develop a healthy family life, to examine also as well how we are living our family lives and even Christian communities with these values and advice of St. Paul to the Colossians that we should develop as Christians. So it's not automatic, it's not spontaneous to love as Christians within the family, but the more we reflect on these words and understand them, why they're so important, it will help a lot in our own family life that we want to live and to be developed and not to be discouraged when we have these challenges. And that brings us to the Gospel, which is Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 to 23. Matthew 2, 13 to 23. Now it talks about Herod, who was deceived by the Magi for good reasons, so that Herod would not kill Jesus. But then he gets upset, he starts to massacre all the children. We celebrated that in the Feast of the Holy Innocents yesterday. But here, what we would like to focus on today is the role of Joseph and Mary in protecting the child. So Joseph hears in a dream, Herod wants to kill the child, bring him away. And then Joseph hears in the dream again from the angel of the Lord that Herod is dead, and then he wants to bring him back from Egypt to Israel. But then Joseph hears in another dream, or rather he hears that Archelaus is the one who took over Herod, and then he himself takes the initiative not to go straight back to Jerusalem, but instead to Nazareth, and that's why Jesus was Nazarene. But I invite you to just read the readings yourself personally. But today I'd like to speak about this role of protection. In the catechism also that we share in the church, we say that there are threats to the family, threats to the Christian community, and also to the domestic church, which is every Christian family. And it's important for us to realize that there are threats to family life, and to realize also what these threats actually are. So there are physical threats, there are social threats, there are also threats in terms of values, that kind of attack the family life and tend to destroy it. And this is represented by the figure of Herod. Herod, who sees a child, full potential of leadership in society, if we like, and in the religious realm, and he sees it as a threat and he tries to destroy it. So it's kind of interesting to see the reality of evil. As they say, evil divides. We can even give it a name of personification, the devil, who tries to divide the family and destroy the family. And if we look at society today, we will see that it's not far off from the truth. So how important for us as Christians, as families, as builders of communities, to realize what these threats actually are and how to confront them and fight the battle of faith, to witness once again, if you remember the theme of this week, to witness to Christian values that can protect and build up family life, a happy family life in the midst of all these challenges and threats that we find against the family. On the other hand, it's not only about the threats. We see the role of Mary to nourish, And as we know, normally we get sick. The body gets sick physically even when we don't nourish our bodies well. So the more we nourish our faith, the more we are strong in our faith, the less we are prone to these sicknesses, if you like, of society or these threats that come to us. So I love this analogy of the body because it helps us to see that these things happen. When our faith is weak, then we are more prone to these threats. So once again, this double role of protection, but at the same time of nourishment. So if we like the very old way of saying it in our church is how we can learn to avoid evil, to protect ourselves from evil, and to seek good, or to do good, which is to nourish our hearts, our minds with good things. So today I invite you just to reflect a little on this Feast of the Holy Family, thinking about Joseph and Mary, to think about two questions. The first is, what are those threats or kind of values that can tend to harm our families? So we can think of many things. We can think of the internet. Not all of internet is bad, but for example, pornography that destroys the family unit, or certain values and attacks against society, negativity, false news, wrong things. So there are things in society that affect us. What are these threats? And the second question is, how can we nourish ourselves better to face these threats? How do we feed our minds and our hearts with good things? So if you like, another analogy of the body for me is, we become what we eat. Nowadays, young people take care a lot of what they eat, how much they eat, of each kind of food, etc. And diet is so important to build the kind of body that we want. So I would say the analogy would be, our mind is like our stomach of the soul. The mind is like the stomach of the soul. It depends on what we feed our minds, then our soul will digest it and make us the kind of people we are, the way we behave, etc. You'll be so surprised if, I lived in kind of my formation, a kind of isolation from the world for a bit, and was only being nourished by scriptures, spirituality, and etc. for a year. And I found that a lot of my behavior actually changed. My behavior, what I thought was the normal thing, human, we call it like human nature, was not really human nature. It's just that I've been feeding my mind and my heart with so many different kinds of things that it just made me behave spontaneously, which I thought was natural, the way I did. So I found out really that's the value of retreats, actually, long silent retreats, to see that we can actually behave differently if we feed our minds with the right things. So the second question could be this. One was about protection, right? What are the threats? And to know them and to avoid them. Find ways to grow to avoid them, because sometimes we find it difficult to avoid, but at least we could walk in that direction progressively to avoid these things. But secondly, what are the things that we nourish our minds with? What are the good things? Try to think about some good ways we can nourish our minds. What do we read? How do we read? Do we read when we're tired? Just flip on anything in the internet that comes along the way? Or do we really choose the kind of spiritual food for our minds? To choose the things we read, to discern well what we eat spiritually, like good parents, like Mary and Joseph. So once again, having this model, let us today learn from the school of Joseph and Mary how to take care of this child Jesus, to protect him in our hearts and to nourish him with the right food, the right things. And then we'll see that building up Christian virtue is not really that difficult or impossible. It depends on the right protection, the right nourishment that we give, and to be serious and disciplined about it. And we'll see that growing in virtue is actually so possible when we do these two things.